This week on the Frame Savers, we dig into Shovel Knight. Welcome to the Frame Savers. We are a retro video game podcast that focuses on speedrunning. Speedrunning is a hobby where we try to beat video games as quickly as possible using whatever tricks, glitches, and stratagems we have available to us. And this is episode number 80, one of the highest numbers in the English language, I think. Am I right about that? Or
I mean, I can't think of a letter higher than 80.
yeah, we're going to have to start moving over to symbols or something at the next one, I would think. But if you are new to the podcast, we are streaming this live on the Twitch at twitch.tv/theframesavers. So if you were listening to the audio format and you've always said, I wish I could watch this live, go ahead, give us a follow. You can come and watch us Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern. But we are doing this episode on not a retro game per se, retro-inspired game.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've done a couple of these. We did Azure Striker Gunvolt. We did some Shantae games. Now we're doing Shovel Knight, and this is a really awesome game. It's a really cool staple of the speedrunning community, and so we're excited to dive into that. But before we do, Chad, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I've been playing a lot of Hobbit lately. So we did our episode on Hobbit, and everyone kept telling me over and over, hey, because of you, I decided to go buy a copy of The Hobbit. And then I started getting to thinking, I was like, you know, I'm a big fan of The Hobbit, like I am. I'm going to relearn it and get really good at it for GDQ submission. So I submitted it to AGDQ, and now I'm just on a tear, man. I'm crushing it left and right. I'm heading straight for world record territory.
Heck yeah, my dude. You guys found some new things too, I think, like in the other stuff since the episode, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of really small improvements that have been made, but then again, since I ran it previous to our episode, there was a ton of small stuff that was found as well, so it just keeps getting better and better. There was also a Big Bad Gameathon that just happened this weekend, and you know, Hurricane Florence couldn't stop me from playing bad video games. I played some bad video games in front of people, and we got a few laughs, a few chuckles, some handshakes at the end. It was pretty good.
Yeah, I also was in Big Bad Gameathon with Barbie Game Girl. So I was in BBG with BGG.
Yeah.
And that was a good time. You know, I've been speedrunning a little known game named Fortnite. Okay. Try to die as quickly as possible, end the match as quickly as possible. I'm very good at it.
So you've been speedrunning Fortnite.
Possible world record contender in my Fortnite play. But I actually had to take a little bit of a break from streaming because there was some construction and some other things going on around my place. But I have some plans. Okay. I go through these phases. Like sometimes in this intro episode, I feel like proud. I'm like, oh yeah, I've been learning this game on the Game Boy and that. And then there's the periods of time where I'm like, oh, and then I feel guilty. This is my guilt time where it's like, John, you need to speedrun. So. But I did enjoy doing a little prep for Big Bad Gameathon, and
there you go. So and we both played this game for this episode.
Yeah,
we played this game for this episode. Speaking of people who love to play this game, which we loved playing this game, MunchaKoopas, how are you doing, and what have you been up to?
I'm doing well. I've been playing a lot of Shovel Knight myself, actually. I do it every Monday through Friday.
Wow, still haven't beaten it, huh?
No, it's taking me forever. Thousands of hours in this point, and I still can't get past level 1. How do you bounce on the bubble?
I don't know. It's a tough one.
One day we will figure that out. Hopefully we will hear later in the episode how to do that, and hopefully that can help you figure out how to finally beat this game. Yeah, I
hope so.
I tuned into your stream a little bit today, and you were participating in a tournament, right? There's a tournament going on right now.
Yes, there's a Shovel Knight low percent tournament currently going on. I was racing my friend Applesock.
Oh, that's really awesome.
That's a great name. I don't know what it means, but I love it.
I like that's the part you got out of it, was just the apple sock. Like the rest of it was just it was just noise, and then like your brain tuned in for apple sock.
Listen, I've seen plenty of speedrunning tournaments. I haven't met a lot of people named Applesock, so I'm just saying that's the part that stood out to me. Yeah, we had a really fun time streaming this together and playing through it. One of the most frustrating parts about doing the podcast, but also kind of rewarding and fun parts, is when we have to drop whatever we're streaming and be like, okay, I have to dedicate this stream to playing The Hobbit or Shovel Knight or whatever. So that can be kind of frustrating or difficult, but this was just a really fun experience. I'm excited to talk about it. And it's kind of one of those like, oh, you've never seen The Godfather? Like, now I can be like, I've played Shovel Knight. You don't have to be mean to me. So if you are looking for speedrunning content, by the way, coming up, California Fire Relief Marathon 2018 is coming up September 28th to 30th. That's going to be on twitch.tv/speedgaming. I'm assuming they're trying to relieve fires in California via a marathon in 2018.
Yeah, I don't think that they're trying to play games to make the fires go out, but they are raising money for good causes for helping with the relief effort. So. And
is that just any type of speedrun?
Yeah, I think it's just a general speedrunning marathon to raise money for that cause. They're hosting on Speedgaming, and it's 3 days worth of scheduled runs. So it starts at like 3 p.m. Eastern and goes up to midnight on Sunday. So it's a ton of stuff. It's being featured on Speedgaming, which Speedgaming, their network has a ton of viewers. So that's going to be really good for the relief efforts, I think.
Awesome. And then we also have a GDQX coming up October 26th to the 28th. If you're not aware, we do a lot of things on Twitch, the speedrunning community, if you're finding the podcast through some other means. And Twitch does a TwitchCon event. That's like a big, if you're, professional streamer or whatever, they go there to do networking and you do meet and greets, stuff like that. They started to implement now and see that the speedrunning community has been growing on Twitch, and they're doing a GDQX, like a little mini GDQ at TwitchCon. So that's going to be a lot of fun. That'll be on twitch.tv/gamesdonequick. Looking forward to that a lot. This will be the first time that's ever been done. So that's going to be kind of exciting to see it. Not like in the mainstream, but like it's part of the Twitch community now, right? Like that speedrunning is part of that event. I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think we talked about that a little bit during the SGQ recap about how, this is going to be their first attempt at putting together a sort of a side event. And so the success of this one is really going to make or break probably their willingness and their efforts in putting together more events like this. And I think whether or not you feel like the community benefits more from GDQ doing more things or the community sort of branching out away from GDQ, either way, it's hard to argue that we don't benefit as a community from there being more high quality events. And so GDQ having a successful event here could be an important step in us having even more successful events throughout the year.
Plus, it's just more stuff to watch.
More stuff to watch.
Sit there and you watch it and you're like, wow, I watched that. That's cool.
I have no shortage of things to watch, unfortunately, at this point in my life.
That's true. So we are doing this episode for a specific reason. This is a listener-selected episode, number 5. I actually forgot about that until I just saw it on here. Like, it's been so long, it feels like, since this got voted in. This actually tied Rystar, which was kind of a shocker to me. I wasn't seeing Rystar really just grassroots movement, moving up the votes, knocking out a lot of
for those of you who voted for Rystar or want to see it otherwise, it's actually been on my list of pockets to do for a while. So I might bump it up the list sooner rather than later to accommodate the tie for Rystar. But this game is just, it's had nearly immeasurable success in the speedrunning community. People really seem to take to this very quickly when it initially came out, and for good reason. It's a fantastic game, and so it doesn't surprise me that for this listener selected episode, someone nominated Shovel Knight and everyone just latched onto it.
Yeah, this is our second tie, actually. I don't know if you remember, but listener selected episode number 1 was a tie between Zelda 2 and DuckTales.
Oh, that's right, and we ended up doing 2 episodes.
Yeah, so we ended up doing a DuckTales episode anyways, but it wasn't marketed or labeled as a listener selected. So hopefully we will maybe get to some Rystar later. But if you don't know what that the listener selected episodes are, our Patreon at Twitch or at patreon.com/theframesavers. That's where you can kind of support us, help us pay for mics and editing and keep the lights on. And every couple months we do a listener selected episode where people who are contributing to the Patreon get to submit games if they donate $5 or more, and then vote on them if they donate $1 or more a month. And so we have an increasing amount of patrons as we have done this episode for 3 years. It's gone up, and so lots of votes this time. You know, there's definitely more participation than ever, and it was cool to see this game rise up. And so I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun to talk about too.
Yeah, we ended up getting 30 people participating in the voting, which is pretty good considering, I mean, that's a decent percentage of our patrons. So, I mean, people came out and said what they wanted to see, and Shovel Knight did really well. So I'm really looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to talking to MunchaKoopas about this awesome game. He has, it's not just from the speedrun perspective. He's actually got some other things that are going to make it an interesting discussion as well.
Absolutely. And speaking of support, my dude, the Electric Underground podcast is a sponsor of the Frame Savers, and the Electric Underground podcast is a show dedicated to the beautiful genre of shmups, or shoot 'em ups. And the podcast is an effort to bring the community closer together, as well as to help introduce new players to these fantastic games. The show covers a wide variety of accessible topics that the average gamer can enjoy. So you don't have to be tuning into long discussions of intricate scoring mechanics. Who would want to hear long banter of video game talk, right?
Yeah.
Not our listeners.
Streamline that, please.
So now, more than ever, it's a great time to get into the genre, and all new players are welcome into the podcast Discord. It's a super chill crowd, and to find the Electric Underground podcast, just Google Shmup Podcast, or I think they're the one with the black and white spaceship, so go check them out. The show will be right there waiting for you. So thank you so much to their support. We're going to go ahead and listen to some fresh Shovel Knight music, and then hop into talking about the
So to kick off with, let's talk a little bit about what Shovel Knight actually is. If you haven't played Shovel Knight yet, what rock have you been living under? Because it's on every single console. I struggled to fit the name of every console that this game was on into our layout on Twitch. It's on.
Yeah, I have to play it to unlock my iPhone. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean it's on the Tesla. It's on my toaster. Basically,
TI-83.
Anywhere that has a microcontroller has Shovel Knight installed on it somewhere. No. It's a 2D side-scrolling platformer. It was developed and published by Yacht Club Games in 2014. It has a fairly straightforward 8-bit graphical style, and it does so really well. It's kind of interesting, this game, because from what I was reading, it seems like they intentionally limited themselves to more or less the NES palette, with a few exceptions. I think it uses like 4 colors that aren't in the original NES palette. But otherwise, I mean, this game is a true homage to the original 8-bit games in that way.
That's cool, because a lot of 8-bit games don't really follow, you know, what 8-bit games did back then. The style is just kind of graphically taken, but it's put into much more powerful computers doing like way more stuff than normal NES would do.
Yeah, it's kind of become a bastardized term at this point, where it's like, you know, we say 8-bit games anytime you can see pixels. So this is really a much more faithful one. Obviously, there's a lot of things being done visually in this game that you couldn't do on the NES. Sure. Some of like the scrolling effects and the much larger screen and the smooth scrolling and the way that it does it. Obviously, you can't pull that off on an NES, but it really is. It feels like a true homage to that style.
And the shovel wasn't invented until like 1995, so it wouldn't even have worked.
Exactly. And by that point, we were almost into the N64 era. Yeah. It made it very complicated for some earlier games to figure out how to talk about tools and things like that.
Yeah.
I still remember when Harvest Moon for the SNES came out, they had to describe how to dig things up, but just with your hands, you know?
Yeah.
So in Shovel Knight, as the name would imply, the shovel's your main weapon, and they kind of took some interesting... They borrowed some interesting ideas from some previous games. So if you've ever played, for instance, DuckTales, you can pogo on enemies like you can in DuckTales. It's very similar to like the downstab mechanic in Zelda 2. There's a lot of other games actually that they credit for sort of being, you know, they're paying homage to with this style. A few that didn't make as much sense to me, but in general, they're borrowing from a lot of tried and true formulas in order to produce this fantastic game. And the basic premise for the game is that you're going through a series of levels trying to make your way to the last level, and throughout the levels, if you want to pick up extra abilities along the way, you have to find these hidden salesmen. You'll find a chest and you'll open it, and out will jump a salesman. I don't know what he's doing inside that chest at all times.
Yeah, doesn't sound like it'd be very comfortable in there,
but you can buy sub weapons that can be used with magic. So things like the flare wand is the first one that you get, and then from there's a bunch of other ones. There's like attack oriented ones, so things like the flare wand, the chaos sphere, the throwing anchor. There's some movement based ones, so things like the dust knuckles and the propeller dagger and the mobile gear. And then just some other things like that. And they all really add some interesting mechanics. So things like the phase lock, it allows you to temporarily become invincible. You just sort of phase out of existence and you're sort of flashing for a little bit, and you can walk over spikes or walk through enemies if you want to. The dust knuckles let you continuously punch through dirt blocks, things like that. And they all have really interesting mechanics that are associated with them.
First of all, I just realized a section that I could have done if I got the phase locket. Now I know what I need to do to go back and do that section if I want.
John's like replaying the game in his head right now. He's like going back.
I didn't get. I mean, I didn't. You know, we didn't have time. We're speedrunners at heart. We didn't have time to go figure everything out.
I 100% of the game.
Yeah, I didn't. So that's awesome. But yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it does have a very large emphasis on money. I feel like it's kind of like that Wario sense of like, I've got to get as much money as I can. So like a lot of these items cost a good amount of money, and so you're kind of grinding. You know, it doesn't have experience per se in any sense, but you're grinding or searching for hidden items in order to upgrade your health, to upgrade these different attacks and such like that. So it's pretty cool. It's a fun style of game. And why don't I dive into the lore real quick?
Yeah, go ahead and tell us what the
I feel like we need
about.
a drop that's like, the lore. You've got to respect the lore. I don't know. I feel like we need to talk about that later.
Yeah, we'll get our producer to find something to put in there.
But companions Shovel Knight and Shield Knight, good friends, were exploring the Tower of Fate together, which sounds like a great day. You never asked me to explore the Tower of Fate, right? We're supposed to be good friends.
I haven't, because it didn't work out well for Shovel Knight.
Who's your Shield Knight? That's what I want to know. He's cheating on me with somebody here. But with Shield Knight is taken over by a cursed amulet, leaving Shovel Knight stranded outside the tower, grieving for his loss and licking his wounds. Not literally like in Tarchan, but, you know, licking his wounds, you know, metaphorically speaking. Shovel Knight gives up adventuring and goes into exile. And so hearing that an evil enchantress has unsealed the Tower of Fate, Shovel Knight takes up his weapons in hopes of saving Shield Knight, which is very sweet. Very sweet friendship going on between them.
Friendship.
Just saying, something, maybe you should study the game a little closer is all I'm saying.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I mean, yeah.
So
what happens from there? So Shovel Knight just like waltzes into the Tower of Fate.
So the enchantress, no, that is not what happens. Let me tell you, the enchantress dispatches the Order of No Quarter. They have no quarter, and they slow him down. You got King Knight, Spectre Knight, Treasure Knight, Mole Knight, Plague Knight, Polar Knight, Propeller Knight, and Tinker Knight. And so these are the different bosses at the end of each stage. They're all knights. They all, you know, it's cool because everybody kind of has just like this weird, quirky aspect about them, right? Like Shovel Knight's obviously kind of a silly concept. We have this knight character, but instead of a sword, he has a shovel. And so all of these kind of fit into that same type of, you know, idea. And so you face these different ones. And you can play as at least one of them, right? Two of them in the version that is out now. There's been a lot of DLC and different things added to the game.
Yeah, one of the things that's been really interesting about this game, and we'll talk a little bit more about their Kickstarter later, but all of the DLC that's come out for this game is technically free. If you have a copy of the game, you can download any of the DLC, and now when they sell it now, it's sold as Shovel Knight Treasure Trove, so it's sold as a bundle of all the games. But
I didn't even know I had it, and I already had the whole.
Right.
That's how much ubiquitous the Shovel Knight game is. It was already installed on my system. Just everywhere, man. But yeah, no, that's really cool. I mean, it's like free money right there. That's so awesome. Like, I mean, I don't know what that means as a financial model, but for the consumer like us, you're getting all these free games and stuff, and it's cool to be able to play as some of the bosses of these stages and see kind of their new movement tech and the new ways that they
It's
do
kind of an
damage
interesting
and do
approach
stuff.
too, because I think it motivates people to buy the game again. You know, it's been what now 4 years since the game originally
Yeah.
released. There's new DLC that's coming out in 2019. If I bought the game originally on my Wii U, like literally who is playing the Wii U anymore? No one is
Yeah.
playing on the Wii U anymore. That is a dead system if there's ever been a dead system. So if new DLC comes out, like I'm probably just going to buy the game again probably on Steam, or buy the game again on PS4 or whatever console I want to play it on, rather than, you know, picking up a Wii U, because honestly,
Sure.
who hasn't set
Or
it on fire at this point?
Yeah, a lot of people have sold them or traded them in or something. It's really cool, and I really like this replay value. I hope Capcom does this with like Mega Man 11, and you can play back through with one of the bosses or something. I really like that mechanic. I think it's a lot of fun. It adds
Yeah,
a lot
all
of
the
replay
DLCs.
value, but like
Yeah,
I want to go play Mega Man 1 as Iceman. You know, I don't want to play as I played as Mega Man enough times. Like I want to go back through as Fireman. That would be cool.
Yeah, all of the bosses are really interesting too. This, I was originally going to write in the notes that this game sort of borrows from Mega Man, because at a high level it feels like it borrows from Mega Man in the sense that there's like each of the stage is themed after a boss, and there are some items that sort of borrow from boss mechanics. But in reality, that's where it stops. Is just that the levels are boss styled. Because you don't like get the boss's power from the boss. Like in the Treasure Knight stage, you get the throwing anchors, but I wouldn't really say that's getting his power.
Yeah,
The
it's not the
Propeller
same
Knight,
at all, for sure.
you can get the Propeller Dagger in Propeller Knight stage, but it's not really getting his power. But in a lot of ways, I think it does sort of borrow from that Mega Man feeling. The stages are sort of laid out much more like DuckTales. If you've ever played DuckTales, like if you've ever... So for speedrunners who are listening, you've never played DuckTales. I'm just going to spoil that one for you. You've never played it. You've played the speedrun of DuckTales, but you've never played DuckTales. In reality, DuckTales is very much a game centered around exploring the levels fully and finding all of these hidden secrets, especially in DuckTales 2, where you could just like... It's this giant map to explore, and there's a ton of secrets. Shovel Knight does the same thing. You know, you punch a wall and it opens up, and there's a whole new room for you to like figure out how to get something out of. And all of these items, you know, the Chaos Sphere and the Mobile Gear and the Propeller Dagger, all these items, the majority of them are in secret rooms. So you could beat the game without finding the vast majority of these items.
Yeah, I didn't find the vast majority of these items, to be honest. I think I found only like, you know, maybe a third of them. And watching the speedrun was cool because I was like, oh, there's all these abilities that I wasn't, you know, able to play with or use. So it's cool though. It's similar to Mega Man though, where you do gain those abilities throughout the game and it starts to add to stuff. But there's no weakness system in that sense. Like it's not like, oh, I found this item, so this boss is gonna take more damage or anything. But still, definitely kind of out of the vein of the Mega Man series. And since this you know, since it's been released back in 2014, there's been a lot of DLC. So there's been Plague of Shadows, which is Plague Knight's backstory. There's Spectre of Torment, which is Spectre Knight's backstory, so that's playing as Plague Knight and Spectre Knight. You got King of Cards, which is King Knight's backstory. That's coming in 2019. Shovel Knight Showdown is coming in 2019.
That's a multiplayer
what are either of those? This sound fun.
King of Cards is another just DLC where you play as King Knight instead. He has different powers. I thought that there was supposed... Muncha, maybe you know... I thought that there was supposed to be something in addition to that. For some reason, I thought I remembered there being some card game aspect in it.
There is a card game aspect in the King of Cards campaign. It's so you'll play card games in special levels in the King of Cards campaign, but the card game itself is mostly side story. Like you can beat King's campaign without playing a single round of cards.
Okay. I think for some reason when it first got announced, I had interpreted that as being sort of like another card game. So it was like Shovel Knight's Hearthstone or something like that. So I think that was probably my misunderstanding the information that was coming out about it. But no, after looking at trailers of it today, I was watching some trailers of it. It looks pretty cool. And I think one of the things that this DLC has done really interestingly is rather than just sort of, hey, here's a level you've already done, but now you get to do it with a guy who moves kind of different. All of the stages are very unique, and they're definitely all designed to play up the aspects of the various characters. In addition to that, so we'll talk more about music later, but the DLC pretty much all has original music. So, I mean, the soundtrack's pretty great, but each of the games is either remixes of the original songs or completely original songs in addition to it. And so, like, the original game's, like, 40-something songs. And I think it's like 48 songs, but then even the Plague Knight DLC is like another 15 songs, and the Spectre Torment DLC is like 25 more songs. So like there's a lot of music.
Out because There's bangers in there. Not to
Yeah.
spoil our review section, but I think y'all know that this game has some bangers.
Yeah.
So I thought King of Cards was actually just No Limit Texas Hold'em with like little Shovel Knight figures on there, but you know, you never know. But
Yeah.
it's cool that this game was a Kickstarter. I don't think I actually knew that. With the original goal of $75,000, it's crazy to think that at this point ended up meeting all stretch goals, raising $311,000. But
Yeah.
by the end of the year it came out, it sold more than 300,000 copies. Right, so
Yeah,
like
it was a ton.
That's like a nice Cinderella story, right? Like you're just this like new developer, whatever, you want to kickstart, you want to make a game, and then it's, you know, now it's on, you know, the Switch, it's on the 3DS, it's on Wii U,
I have to imagine
it's on everything.
I have to imagine Shovel Knight's Kickstarter has to be one of the most successful Kickstarter game stories there are.
Yeah, it's gotta be up there.
I can't think of anything that really competes with it in terms of Shovel Knight.
I don't know. Was Super Meat Boy a Kickstarter, or
I don't think so.
They're just studios, right?
I think they used a typical funding model. I think Shovel Knight is one of the first and most successful Kickstarters in terms of using it for game development budget. I was reading there was an interview with the Shovel Knight dev team, and they were talking about like what that actually means. You know, when you say that you need $75,000 to make a game, and then you end up raising $311,000, or like I think it turned out to be something more like $340 something thousand before they got taxes and stuff taken out.
Yeah.
You know, you kind of like, the question is, okay, well, what do you do with all that extra money? But after them kind of spelling out what development costs actually look like in the real world, it's really interesting to look at. They were talking about sort of the magic number for raising funding for developing a game is you need $10,000 per person per month in order to make a game. And so even at $311,000 being their take-home amount, that's still not technically enough to pay people what they're worth for the amount of development time that went into this game. So it's kind of interesting, you know, that they started with a goal of $75,000. I mean, this was clearly a labor of love if they were willing to produce the game on that kind of budget.
Absolutely. That's what I was going to say. $75,000 does not seem like a large amount of money to design a video game.
That's paying 2 people for a year, basically. And you need a way bigger staff than that for longer than a year, so.
But, to be fair, you know, when the Frame Savers video game comes out, we're going to be, you know, we could probably do it on 75,000. So like if people hopped on the Patreon right now, right?
I'll do it right now for 50,000. It won't be a great game, but I'll do it.
Will it? It won't be as good as this one, you don't think?
I don't think so. That's big shoes to fill, my man.
That's fair. That's fair. But yeah, it received high praise from reviewers. Out like with the backers, we said it sold over 300,000. With the backers, it sold 180,000 copies within a month, which is crazy. So it was like hot out the gate, which is just surprising for a Kickstarter game, I think. And then you say something here about Nintendo's involvement.
Well, the developers were expecting more Nintendo support in terms of the Kickstarter. So sort of internally, the way they were developing was really promoting the Nintendo systems they were going to put it on. So when you signed up on Kickstarter to support it, you told them what system you wanted it for, which sort of gives a tacit implication of what systems they need to prioritize. And I think they were expecting more Nintendo support, but at the end of the day, I think the interview that I was reading said that only 30% of their overall support included Wii U and Nintendo 3DS. So I think that came as a surprise, considering internally at the time they were very focused on Nintendo consoles.
So this game came out in 2014, huge success, right? We played it in 2018, it appears. We were a little late to the game to beat it, at least.
Well, I probably played it in like 2016. I just didn't finish it.
Okay. What were your thoughts? How did you enjoy it?
In 2016 or in 2018?
In 2018. Dude, stop living in the past, my dude.
It was really good. I played through the entire game with my good friend John in my ear.
Nice.
And it was a ton of fun. I don't often feel motivated to like complete games, not in the typical beating sense, but just I'm not a completionist. I don't need 100% in games I play. I typically will seek out as much enjoyment as I'm looking for, and then I will beat a game. That's how I enjoy games. Is I will play side missions as long as they are entertaining to me, and I will finish the game, and that's about it. But for this, you know, I finished the game, and in the credits, it told you what your percentage was. It said it was 87% complete, and I was like, kind of want to do more. I kind of want to finish that bad boy up. And then finding out there's all these DLC that I apparently have access to that I haven't played yet. I really want to check those out.
Yeah.
This game was really, really satisfying. The levels were all fun. I never felt like, okay, I finished the level, I got to play another. I was like excited to move on to the next level with whatever power-ups I had found, doing whatever I could do. When I saw an encounter come up on the map, I rushed over to that encounter to see what it was. I certainly wasn't just trying to push forward at all times. I ended up collecting a lot of extra money and buying a lot of extra gear and equipment and stuff like that. It was a ton of fun.
Yeah, but you didn't buy the ornate
Ornate plate. Yeah, it told me that it didn't do anything, so I took that as a clue that it was just for rich people.
Nice. Yeah, I had a lot of fun. I had initially played this game just like the first 2 levels on my 3DS. Bought a physical copy because I was like, oh, this is, I was collecting a little bit more back then, and it was it's a good game, and I always wanted to try it. So I was like, this seems like a good portable game, but it just never hooked me for some reason. But playing it on the Switch for this and hanging out with my buddy Chad, I had a lot of fun. Like you said, I didn't really like dread that there was extra levels or like feel frustrated, like, oh, the game's gonna keep going on. Like you said, sometimes these things spawn on the map and move around, which I don't know if that's from Mario 3 kind of. I don't know how random they are or not. Muncha can speak to that, but it made me want to go, run into them to get extra content to kind of see what's going on. And, I could definitely see wanting to go back, and I probably won't 100% it, but I can see wanting to go back and finding all the music sheets. It's similar to Celeste in that sense, where it's one of those games that incentivizes you to go back and kind of play it again and try and find all the different hidden objects, because once you hit a checkpoint in this game, you can't go back, or once you advance a room. So if you figured out how to, there were times where I would see something and be like, either A, I know what ability I need, I don't have it yet, or B, oh, I know how I could have done that now, but I can't go back. So it would make me want to replay the level and try and go, get those things. So that's really cool. What about you, Muncha? When did you play it first?
Yeah, I think it's pretty accepted that you really, really like this game. So what was your blind experience like?
I first played it on launch on the 3DS, and this game, fun fact, came out the same week that SGDQ 2014 happened. Oh. So all week long, I was playing Shovel Knight while watching GDQ, and it just really inspired me, and I loved everything about the game. So I actually bought a Wii U specifically to stream and speedrun Shovel Knight.
What an investment!
I know.
that sounds like a comfy week, though. Playing some Shovel Knight, watching you. I want that week. So, anyways, yeah, let's go ahead and take a quick break.
Hold on.
No, I'm sorry.
No, we're not taking a break. We're talking about this. So you actually ended up. So I mean, you really, John, slow down. John's so excited about how good at segues he's gotten that he's just like on it. He's like, okay, now we're gonna transition, right?
It's the end of the notes. That's when it's over.
John,
I'm just not gonna talk over here.
All right. So playing this game, how quickly did a speedrun community spawn out of that? Like, I mean, this game just seems built for it. There's so many cool movement pieces to it. I feel like when you play this game, you're immediately thinking about how can I do this faster?
Yeah. I'm not sure how the initial community formed, because I know a lot of it was just Kickstarter backers, and I actually didn't find out about this game during its Kickstarter. I found out about 6 months later. On some news app on my phone.
Wow.
But it just reminded me of games that I played as a kid and thought, okay, I'd really like that. But as for the speedrun community, there was like our buddy Sent from GDQ, Captain Drake, and I think Andy is his name, the mystery tournament champion, several times in a row. He was, they were big into this game when it first came out. So there was a pretty busy forum on Speed Demo's archive. And then I just kind of sat back and observed everybody else, because this was the first game I'd ever speedran. I had no idea how.
This was your first speedrun?
This was my first speedrun, yes.
Oh wow, cool.
Oh wow. And now you're the shining paragon of our community that you are now.
I'm a person. I push buttons.
Yeah, you push buttons real fast too. I mean, it goes pretty well. So how
it was fairly quickly in a GDQ too, right? Wasn't it in 2015?
Captain Drake did any percent for Shovel Knight in AGDQ 2015. Okay. And there have been 4 more appearances of Shovel Knight since then, and I've been a part of all of them.
That's awesome.
Wow, that's awesome.
That's really
so
awesome.
It was in a GDQ quickly, which seems to be the running theme of newer games now. It's like Celeste, Mario Odyssey, these games that come out, GDQ gives it a little bit of time to marinate, but it is kind of cool to look back and see a run in GDQ. Back in 2015, I'm sure the runs changed quite a bit, which we'll probably talk about later. But it's cool to see that it got into a GDQ pretty quickly after release.
So you are now, according to Twitter at least, you are now a what is your description for it? You are a freelance contracted QA for Yacht Club games.
Yes, I am an official employee, but I'm not on any sort of permanent employment. I am hourly, but like my paychecks are signed by Yacht Club Games. There isn't like a third agency contracting in there somewhere.
Sure.
And so I'm on the King of Cards and Shovel Knight Showdown projects until they are done, and then I'll be off on my next adventure.
Okay, that's really awesome. So what is how did that partnership end up forming? So I assume that this is one of those instances we've seen with indie games where the devs are at least somewhat involved in the speedrun community. I imagine that's at least how you sort of started forming that relationship. But how does that work, sort of transitioning from your role as a speedrunner to being QA?
It's definitely interesting having to then think about the game as a job in some ways. Like speedrunning in itself can be a job if you aspire to be a performer. You know, you still have to put in practice. But the simple act of like looking for bugs and looking at the game from a different perspective of not necessarily trying to break it to save time, but looking for things that break it from a casual immersion standpoint. But it's a very similar, but at the same time different mindset. But I really like it. I realized one of my hobbies is just looking for bugs in games in general. And for some reason, bugs just happen to me sometimes. Like the other night, I was playing Golf Story, and I hit a chip in, and it hit an NPC, and then went in the hole, and the game crashed.
Oh wow!
And I'm like, I didn't even do anything. I just played the game normally, so things just happened to me.
Did you call them up and ask for money?
No.
You're QA for them now.
I may as well be.
Chad's a big Golf Story fan.
I do love Golf Story.
I will say, I think Chad's asking because he's hoping to get a job with Color Dreams doing QA. Is that the case?
If they start making more games, I'm calling them up.
I like Golf Story. I still need to finish it.
Yeah.
Like, this game is too good. The mechanics work too well. This is not a Color Dream product.
So do you ever find yourself sort of so I think this is the struggle, is that you are a speedrunner, and speedrunners, there is a positive association with finding game-breaking things, but you are QA and you are paid by an employer to find those things and remove them. So does that ever feel like a conflict of interest to you?
It honestly never does, because most of the things that I find that need to be fixed generally would not help a speedrun in any way, shape, or form. Just because of the way the game is laid out. Like, out-of-bounds tricks generally don't help much in Shovel Knight because you don't have like good ways to gain height if you get out of bounds. So it's not like I can clip from one side of the map to the other really easily. The game just isn't set up in that way. So most of the things I find are like, hey, on this particular frame, this interaction is not happening. Or if I get a double KO on this boss, this cutscene does not proceed as it should. So to answer your question, it is not a conflict of interest, because the work that I do, I know that it will make the game better for more people in the long run. Sure. That said, there are still things I try to suggest for speedruns. We can talk about that in a bit. And like, I am keeping an eye on a few things in the King of Cards development to then suggest later when more things are finalized. I can be like, hey guys, I think speedrunners would enjoy, like, if this aspect changed this minute amount. And that's the quick thing. That's a good thing about working for Yacht Club, is everybody's voice matters. So like in the credits of Shovel Knight, I'm not listed as QA tester. I'm listed under a long list of contributors, which includes all previous people that have worked on Shovel Knight, including testers that came before me. And the nice thing is that, because we are also directly involved with the development team, like, they take our feedback much more seriously. And so like random suggestions for design will end up in the game. Like there's actually, well, not even just the game, but in like merchandise, there's a shirt out with King Knight, and he's drawing on a map with a quill, and it was my suggestion to use a quill. So they try and take input from everybody in the office regarding things, which is nice.
Cool. Yeah, and there's lots of glitches and game breaking things or things that don't work well that have nothing to do with speedrunning, right? I mean, I'm sure you run into tons of glitches and stuff, or something might get discolored, or something, like you said, isn't beneficial to going faster, but ruins that immersion experience for a casual gamer, where it might mess up some, visuals, might mess up music, something like that. So I'm sure we look for a very specific set of game-breaking things, right? But I'm sure there's plenty of them that exist as well. Or if you even go to YouTube, there's lots of glitches that people like to exhibition and show off that unfortunately don't benefit speedrunning, right? But
yeah,
you know, probably shouldn't have been coded out if it happens. So
there's a lot of those types that are fun to show off in Shovel Knight, and I try to not report those, or if I do show them to the team, I'm like, hey, this is only possible if you like use the cheat code that alters your physics. Can this remain just because like who's going to do this? Because one, not many people know about the existence of the cheat code, but like so there are things like that where I find like this would be hilarious to show off as like a donation incentive at an event.
Yeah.
But it has to be fixed anyway because like that's just the nature of the beast.
Sure. Do you ever find yourself sort of arguing in favor of those sorts of things? It's like, we found this. It could be really useful. Please don't change this.
Generally, I don't try to say that this would be useful for a speedrun. I try to not take speedruns into consideration when thinking about bugs. It's more so that like if I find a mechanic that I think is interesting or some interaction that I think would benefit speedrunning, I'll put in a little note like I think this is cool, but like I understand why it would need to be changed because of, you know, X, Y, and Z reasons.
Right.
And more often than not, like Ian or David, the two programmers who code everything, of course, that's what programmers do. But they will reply to me and say, you know, hey, I think like this is good. We could maybe work this in some way, or sorry, it has to go. So there's usually some sort of consideration if something like that is found.
Right.
A good example, just really quick, is well, they're very supportive of speedruns in general, but in Spectre Knight's campaign, it was found that in the Lost City level, you could actually clip through a floor in one room and essentially skip half of the next room. And it'd be very simple to fix, from what I know, but the team has just kind of left the bug in limbo and looked at it and gone like, well, it's entertaining, and it's unlikely to happen, so I guess it's fine.
Right. Yeah, I mean, anything that doesn't completely ruin the casual experience, even if it's unintended, but, you know, a casual player would be unlikely to have that happen. Probably, I've always heard that to be sort of the phrasing that's used, you know, as long as it doesn't hurt the casual experience. So that definitely makes a lot of sense. I mean, in general, do you find yourself contributing largely to that development experience as well? So beyond just hunting down glitches, are you often helping to fine-tune mechanics? Just, you know, this part needs to be a little faster, this part needs to be a little bit slower, jump height doesn't work here, or something like that?
Most of the time, no, because by the time the game gets to me at that state, it's already gone through the programming team or the level design team, and obviously they have the final say because they are the game, essentially. That said, there are certain times where, like, I'll offer some feedback on level design. It's like level design most specifically because, like, that's obviously right there in front of me. I can see it. Like, I myself am not a programmer. I didn't code how the game works, so I don't know like what frame Shovel Knight jumps on, as an example. But for certain level design things, I can point out like, hey, like this happened in an early form of one of Plague Knight's challenges actually before release. There was a section where you'd hit a switch and you'd spawn two different walls in like a one tile gap between them, and if you did it incorrectly or like a way the level designer didn't expect you to, you'd get stuck in the walls or killed by the walls as they spawned and all that. And so I showed them like, hey, I'm very skilled at moving this character. I cannot get past this screen with no matter what I do. So there's situations like that where like my feedback on design is more helpful. But that said, it's always a team thing. So like any suggestion I bring up is then like discussed by my fellow QA team and then by the design team and whoever. I have gotten to do a little bit of design work on King of Cards, so I'll be able to talk more about that once the game is out. Nothing major, but I got to put like my mark in the game, which is like as a former fan. Yeah, it's super cool to me. Like 4 years ago, I was just like everybody else. I was a fan of the game, and then if you had told me 3 years later I'd be working at the company, I'd be like, you're lying to me, sir or madam.
That's awesome.
Very cool. All right, yeah. So let's take a quick music break, and we will transition into talking about our ratings.
So each and every week, we like to go ahead and do a little casual review of the game we're talking about before we dive into the speedrun discussion. And we like to go over this in a set number of categories. We've got graphics, music and sound, controls and gameplay, difficulty and fairness, fun and replayability, and then we kind of try and give it a final score from 0 to 10. Throw up your 0.5 out of 10 emotes in the chat if you would like. But we do use the whole scale from 0 to 10. So we've had 0.5s, we've had 10s. So let's kick it off with the graphics, my dude.
Yeah. I mean, we praised it pretty heavily before. I think that this game does a few really interesting things. So obviously they added in a few extra colors on the color palette. But aside from that, being able to produce something that looks this good with the original NES color palette is really impressive. Now, you couldn't reproduce this entirely on the NES because the NES had certain limitations on how many colors could be on one 8x8 region of the screen.
Yep. I was going to ask that, actually.
But I think you could still get pretty close, you know, maybe not gameplay, but graphically. And I think that this is just a gorgeous game, giving yourself that limitation in advance. The backgrounds...
Yeah, I'm sure some of the sprites wouldn't work either. There's some pretty large bosses and some other stuff. But the game is a really great homage to 8-bit graphics. I think it looks really gorgeous. All of the different, you know, bosses are very unique looking. Every level has very unique feel. It's definitely not one of those samey games at all. I felt like every level was a different experience. Every level had different mechanics in it and different types of sprites, different types of backgrounds. And so I really enjoyed kind of the variety that the game brought.
Yeah, everything's really visually distinctive. What about you, Munch?
Well, I would like to say that you both, I'm glad you both said those things, because that was the original design intent, was for every level to be very memorable and unique. I obviously love the art in this game. Like, that's what initially drew me to it. I saw it and I'm like, this reminds me of Yoshi's Island because bright colors, that's the only association there.
Sure.
Also say hello to my cat stream. But anyway, what I appreciate most about Shovel Knight is attention to detail and just how smooth the animations are, especially on some of the smaller sprites. For anyone who doesn't know much about pixel art, you'd think that the smaller a sprite is, the easier it is to animate and like make it readable, but that's actually the opposite is true. Just because you have less pixels to work with doesn't mean it's easier. So a lot of emphasis has to be put on all the characters and making sure all of their idols, stances, their animations, every part of them is readable and understandable. And that's just what I love the most, is that the game has a very distinct style and it utilizes everything within that style incredibly well, and everything is themed very well.
Yeah, I would say that is also a real close tie to the Mega Man series. Mega Man's always been really good at each level kind of having its distinctive feel to it based off of the boss that was there, and this game does that exact thing. The bosses are a certain, you know, propeller knight or something like that. The stage is built around the concept of wind and propellers, and the whole game design is built around that boss. That's very similar to the way Mega Man approaches things, and I like that quite a bit. It makes it a lot easier to enjoy a level because it does feel like, oh, now that I'm going to the next level, I'm going to enjoy kind of new mechanics, new different things that the levels, you know, previous to it didn't bring. Some of that kind of bleeds into the gameplay discussion, but before that, music and sound, yeah. I would say this has a good music and a good sound.
Yeah, the soundtrack whips. Before we do just the normal discussion, I put down a few notes here. It was nominated for Giant Bomb's 2014 Best Music Award. It won IGN's 2014 Best Music Award. The soundtrack was primarily by Jake Kaufman, who also worked on Shantae. He worked on the alternate soundtrack for Crypt of the Necrodancer. He worked on DuckTales Remastered. He worked on Retro City Rampage. He worked on a ton of really great games. And there were also 2 contributions by Mega Man composer Manami Matsume. Yeah, Matsume.
It has many of what the kids call bangers, I think is what I've been told. Is that correct?
Is
that
good.
The right term? Yeah, I mean, really great, you know, 8-bit styled music. Really just each song fits the level really well. This is kind of the best soundtrack I've listened to since Celeste, which I just played recently as well. Obviously, Celeste is really well known for its music, as you know, and very different styles of music. This has more of that 8-bit chiptune style to it that really, you know, pumps you up in certain stages. It's got some spoopy music. It does a really good job. I don't really know how to articulate it other than it's definitely high energy, upbeat chiptunes music that has great memorable melodies, very catchy, not just mailed in at all. It was clearly an emphasis of this game to say we want really good music for these stages.
Yeah, you Muncha?
Yeah. Well, I would say the same, of course. I listen to it all the time. Like I was telling you earlier, Oth, I'm one of the only people in the office at work that can listen to the music like from a casual perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like I'll get in my car and turn on the Lost City music, and then I'll drive by my coworkers and wave, and they'll just shake their heads at me like, "What are you doing? Listen to something else."
Yeah, no kidding.
But that's just because we hear it so often. So some fun facts about the music. The 2 tracks composed by Manami Matsumae are the Iron Whale and the Explodatorium themes. And then the soundtrack itself is actually composed inside FamiTracker, so the soundtrack would
wow.
actually run on an NES if you
I
could
was
get
wondering
it
that
on
as well.
an
That's so cool.
That's
So it fits all of the limitations of a Famicom soundboard, basically, or
Yes.
sound chip.
That's
So-
really
Yes.
impressive because I mean we talked about how there are limitations for the graphics, but beside that, I mean there's actually a lot of limitations for NES music. You only get like 3 channels to work with at a time, and if you want to do more complicated things with those channels, you have to arpeggiate chords and things like that. You can't have more than basically 3 different notes playing at the same time, more or less. That's the short version of it.
The Famicom had an extra channel, though, correct? That's why like Castlevania 3 has better music and other.
Yeah, so the
there's an additional
Famicom I
council.
think had 2 additional
Okay.
additional channels.
So it probably follows that. I would
Maybe.
assume.
Yeah, I
like you said,
believe it
Famicom.
does.
I'm assuming
Yeah.
if the program has the word Famicom in it, probably.
But
is a Famicom.
nonetheless,
But
I mean,
still, that's
there's
really
still a lot of
impressive.
limitations. So for it to be
Yeah,
properly composed for the Famicom, that's still pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean the amount of limitations that were removed CD-based games like back in the PS1 era was just astronomical. So to be able to go back and kind of implement what you would want to write a song as, but in 1980s technology is really impressive. I like that a lot. That's cool.
For sure.
Yeah, Jake really flexed his classical music 4-part harmony voice for that.
Yeah, that was really good. I really enjoyed that, and Celeste. They were both good enough that I'd listen to them. I don't really listen to game music, but I would see listening to both of those kind of, in a casual perspective. What's your all's favorite song?
I mean,
I like the.
Yeah, I was going back through it to pick music for this episode. I really like Pride More Keep. I know it's the first one, and it's probably the one that MunchaKoopas has probably heard the most, but I actually really like that track. But then again, I haven't been burnt out by listening to it 3,000 times.
I think
Yeah.
mine's the Propeller stage music, the Propeller Night music. I really like that little chiptune melody that runs through it. It's quite a bit of fun, and it kind of goes well together with the air mechanics, the wind mechanics that you're having to deal with in that stage. I'm a big fan.
I'm
You have
gonna
a
go with,
favorite?
The Clockwork Tower. The track is titled "Of Devious Machinations."
Ooh.
That wasn't
Yeah.
one of the Manami Matsume tracks, right?
Correct. Hers was Plague Night and Treasure Night,
Okay.
which are also very wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, what about controls and gameplay? I'll go ahead and kick this. I think the controls and gameplay are a lot of fun. I think the controls are really tight. I think it's what makes this game such an enjoyable experience. We were talking before the podcast about kind of our experience with the game, and you pointed out a really good point that you feel like you're pulling off pretty cool stuff just in the casual play through the game. The intended mechanics of the game make you kind of feel like a speedrunner in the sense that, oh, I'm pulling off this cool trick where I'm I think of just off the top of my head those plant type things where you have to shovel them and then quickly jump on them and bounce up. And when you get the timing down for that, you feel a sense of accomplishment because the way it flows just makes you feel like you're doing something unique tech wise, like almost oh, I bet there's a simpler way, but I can do it this way, when it is the intended way, but it feels swaggy, I guess.
Yeah, the bushes that float up in the lich yard, and I mean there's a lot of mechanics just like that though. Like they set you up for feeling
pogo
really
bouncing on moving cannonballs,
Right.
like across giant pits. That's a really cool one as well, or on enemies, to get over different spaces or get high enough. I think they all feel like almost like they're not intended. I don't know, like it's designed around those mechanics, but when you do it, you feel like you're doing something swag or something unintended.
Yeah, you feel like you're
almost.
pulling something cool off.
Yeah, like it's the kind of stuff you do in other video games as speed runs, right? whereas the game would give you a different intended thing. But the game
I would say
just
even
lets you do
casually,
that.
the boss fights felt the same way for me. Even
Fights,
though
yeah.
I had stored up a lot of money and bought a lot of extra health, so I was flush with health. I feel like a lot of the boss fights really came down to nail biters at the end, and a lot of times success played out in a situation where maybe I was, you know, on par with the boss, maybe I was losing a little bit, but at the end, like, I would figure out the pattern and I'd put it all together, and it just felt really rewarding figuring that stuff out, and you feel like you're pulling off cool tricks when it happens.
Which is a very Mega Man style of gameplay where you're, oh, I need to learn all these bosses' patterns and figure out kind of the couple of things I need to do, the places I can stand that won't, you know, make me take damage, and, you know, what is he going to do after he does this move. I agree, and I've never died in a video, so I didn't see anything but success, of course. But
Exactly.
the bosses were pretty difficult, and there was a lot of variety in, you know, the way that they fought you as well. So they all felt kind of different. And then again, in Mega Man fashion, you do the boss rush at the end, which is always cool because you kind of get to revisit all of the bosses you fought. Some of them now with you have more powers and a lot more, you know, experience in the game. And you know, that the game's basically a combination of levels and that, but it also has a lot of that exploration aspect where you kind of want to make sure you got everything in a room before you move on, because you can't go back. But there's a lot of hidden walls, there's a lot of hidden, you know, items in different places. Sometimes when branching paths will present themselves, you want to make sure that you go to, you know, the one that will get you that music note or whatever the thing is you're looking for before you move on, you know, to progress the stage. And I like those kind of games. Celeste does a really good job of that. The Wonder Boy games do a lot of that. Shantae, a lot of these modern retro games have been good about adding enough hidden stuff that you are incentivized to replay it, but also just to explore a little bit more than you generally would in your typical straightforward platformer.
I mean, so this is your opportunity, MunchaKoopas, to talk about how what's your perspective of the controls, especially, I mean, even as it plays into the speedrun. Like, do you feel like the controls are the best they could be for you as a speedrunner who demands so much more of it than we did?
I would say yeah, like that is one of the things that attracted me to it, was like you guys were saying, you can do a lot of cool stuff with the basic tools you're given. Like just manipulating enemy positions and bouncing off of them with your shovel is a ton of fun. I think I mean I really like this game because I enjoy the style of platforming where your character has like a skid if they're about to turn around. Some people don't like that. Some people say that Shovel Knight isn't floaty enough for their liking. Some people don't like that when you stop holding the direction, Shovel Knight immediately stops moving, as opposed to some other games where the character will continue to fall. Not necessarily like a fixed jump arc like Castlevania, but you know, you have a little bit of momentum, kind of like I think Symphony of the Night does that. But I don't know. I of course have nothing but good things to say. But I think the controls are what really sell it for me. Is that all of my actions feel quick and snappy, and it feels fun to do them. It feels like I feel powerful when I execute something cool as a speedrunner, because it looks like I'm doing something really unintended, when really I'm just pushing like the limits of the movement system to its like highest state.
Sure.
And let's be honest, is there any better stab than the down stab?
That's true.
I mean, up stab's not even close.
No, I mean if you hold the shovel in reverse, and you know, and then like do a like forward stabbing motion like that can work. But I think the down is probably the most.
If you hold the
satisfying.
shovel upside down, you're going to be landing on the shovel when you downstab, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
That's true.
I know that when I played Zelda 2, as soon as I got downstab, I didn't do anything but downstab. Why would why would I stab when I could be downstabbing? So
just to let you feel as appreciative as you should about the downstab.
We can't experience
another
happiness.
stab.
We can't experience happiness without sadness. Likewise, we cannot experience the downstab without the stab.
Yeah, exactly. You need to know the different experiences and just really take them to heart. So when it comes to difficulty and fairness, I would say this was a fairly easy casual game, at least for first playthrough. But obviously, there's a lot of ways to make it more difficult. I did get a lot of extra health. You don't have to get extra health. You don't have to get certain upgrades. You don't have to upgrade your armor or get different abilities. You could, similar to Mega Man Buster Only, you could just stick with only the shovel and not use any magic or any abilities of you know, that you find throughout the game. And so it's probably one of those games that has a higher difficulty ceiling if you want to challenge yourself. But as a casual playthrough, I died, I think 100 times or something like that. So it was quite a number of deaths for a casual playthrough, but the deaths are not as punishing as other games. There's 4 or 5 checkpoints in each level. So, it was something. I mean, what did it take us, like 4 hours or something? Maybe 5 hours?
I think I finished right around 4 hours.
Yeah, and we were both also, going to additional things and playing around trying to find stuff. So, not the hardest game, right, for compared to modern standards of how long games take, but I think it also has a lot of challenging platforming. It has some decent parts where it was tougher to figure out what the game wanted you to do and kind of not solve a puzzle, but there were a couple points I got a little bit stuck trying to figure out the mechanics of the stage, and some of the pits and jumps were difficult. So it was not, a breeze. It was definitely I think a pretty perfect level of challenge.
I think this is probably my one negative to say about the game. I do think that it's too easy. I just looked up on the website how long to beat. That's a website that sort of gives you a rough estimate of how long it would take the average person to beat a game. And they say that for an average person, you can complete all of the game, everything there is to play, in about 8 hours.
Yeah.
Which I think that's probably still not that much. I think once you add in the DLC, that fixes it. Like that, my opinion of it is better. As far as like gameplay to cost ratio, I think that 8 hours of content for someone who's maybe not as skilled as we are, that's probably too little. But then you add in all the free DLC and that fixes it. But sort of directly in contrast to that, one thing that you mentioned that I actually forgot to mention that we actually talked about a lot while we were playing it casually is how interesting that mechanic is, where you have to make the choice between, do I break the checkpoint in order to get extra money, or do I go ahead and use the checkpoint to give me some security? And I definitely broke a lot of the checkpoints. I think that's why the game became much easier for me at the end, is because I had so much money, so I bought so much health and bought so much equipment and all of these things that just made the game easier. But had I been a little worse and not as willing to break the checkpoints and not having all that really high level gear, then maybe the game would have played out a little differently for me. So I think
I didn't know about that mechanic for quite a bit of time, so it did, and it is a challenge though if you break a checkpoint and then you come onto a section that you're bad at. Like I had one particular case where I had to keep redoing a whole checkpoint because I kept dying at the next checkpoint because it had a room that I was struggling
I restarted a stage because I had broken a checkpoint that I really needed. Like, I realized after the fact I shouldn't have broken this checkpoint, so I just restarted the stage.
I didn't even know that was a thing, but I would say the one thing that could be tougher is the boss fights. I think the levels themselves present enough challenges in terms of platforming and enemy fights. I think the boss fights just felt like they were good boss fights, but they weren't. I really like encountering a boss that I'm probably going to die to 4 or 5 times before I'm able to beat it. But that's my preference.
None of the bosses took me more than 3 attempts, and I think that's probably a problem.
Yeah, I would like it to be a bit more.
It's always so hard for us to judge when we talk about difficulty because, as much as we joke, as much as we joke about us not being particularly great at games, like, we are better than the average gamer. We play a lot more of them. We've honed those skills. And so what we consider easy might for some be normal or even difficult. And so it's hard to say for sure. I know for my taste, I think I would have enjoyed this game a little more if it had been a little harder.
We both like overly challenging games
we do.
Too at the same point. Because we're masochists.
That's really my only. I mean, it's hard to not just outright praise this game for everything. But that was my. I
encounter so little success in life that when I encounter it in a game, it's an uncomfortable feeling. I don't know how to handle the fact that first try. It makes me uncomfortable. I want my games to make me feel like I normally do. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I get that. Art imitates life.
Yeah. When it comes to fun and replayability, this game does have a lot of for sure. I mean, games of this era, like the actual 8-bit era, definitely did not allow you to have this much content, it's really cool to see. There's a lot of hidden items, more so than even in Celeste, which we talked about a few weeks ago. There's several rounds of DLC, which again come with, the game or are free to download. Allowing you to play with a whole different character, which has whole different movement mechanics and such. I mean, this game is designed not to be, I played it for the 5 to 8 hours and I'm done. And I think that's where the real gameplay value comes from is like, oh, I could see someone playing this for 40 hours because they wanted to play, all the DLCs, get all the different items, explore all the different stuff. And that could take a decent amount of additional time, I think. And that gives it a lot of replay value for sure. I don't know that I'll go back and hunt it, but it's at least crossed my mind that it could be fun to go back and get all the music sheets and all that. And I'm not normally a completionist, similar to you, Chad. So that's always good.
Yeah, I think this game definitely rewards you for that kind of thing. I think for fun and replayability, this game has so much replayability. I definitely took my time in a lot of stages, like trying to hunt down every secret room, and it feels like almost every screen has a secret room attached to it sometimes. It feels like you can't go a whole screen without finding something hidden. So, it really just became.
And it feels good digging up the money too.
Yeah.
It feels good digging up the money out of the ground. So
I know. I actually once I got
replayable all day.
Once I got to the second town, I bought an upgrade that allowed me to dig up an entire pile of cash in one dig. And I gotta tell you, that was the worst money I'd ever spent because it's much less good. It doesn't feel nearly as good to just dig it up in one dig. It felt good to like take 6 digs to dig it all up.
It helps a lot in the auto-scroller stages, though. I'll tell you that.
That's true. That's true.
You don't have time to be sitting there digging all day. So I would say a lot of replayability and a lot of fun. We usually focus on the replayability, not the fun. But the game is fun. I mean, the mechanics, I think we've kind of gone over it enough times. But the down stab and the bouncing off of enemies and the way they design the levels around that mechanic is specifically what makes this game really fun, and it feels good to control Shovel Knight. And those are the best games in my opinion. When it's fun to control the character just in general, that's as good as it gets. That's what Mario Odyssey just nailed, right? I thought it was so fun controlling Mario and doing the different tricks that made the whole game. It didn't matter what levels I had to traverse or whatever. This game has that similar type of controls where I feel like it's not just the controls, it's not just the down stab and the bouncing, but the fact that they really
it plays well with all the stages
skillfully crafted the stages around those mechanics to make it feel fun. I think it's a lot of fun, and that's what matters most to me. Even if I only got 5 hours out of it, like that's worth it to me because I had a good amount of fun doing it.
Muncha, it's my understanding you didn't find this game very replayable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Correct. I've only played it once actually, but I've been playing that playthrough for over 7,000 hours.
Okay.
One day you're gonna get there. I tell you, it's not as hard. You're gonna finish it up.
I hope so.
So outside of the speedrunning experience, like, so do you find yourself to be a completionist typically?
I personally am not. I'm more like how you said earlier, Oth. I will play a game as much as I get enjoyment out of it. I will seek out like the secrets as long as they provide me enjoyment. The most recent example I can think of is probably Breath of the Wild. I did finish all 120 shrines because I'm like, well, these are kind of like the main thing in the game, so hopefully they'll all be super unique and different. And then it turns out the last ones I had missed were like just repeats of ones I had already done. Like a major test of strength. Okay, hit with the sword here and then there, and like I'm not gonna go chase down all the other things. I have no desire to 100% Breath of the Wild. I did have the same desire to 100% Shovel Knight. I think my initial playthrough was about 6 hours, and then I spent about another hour and a half or so collecting everything. And I distinctly remember during my playthrough, one, I also thought it was too easy, but more on that in a moment. But as I was going through the game, I realized like I don't want it to end. I like that you beat 3 levels, you see the clouds scroll over, and there's more levels. And when it did that for the final time, I'm like, there has to be more somewhere. Where's the second map?
Yeah.
But that's the best. I like being left in a place where I want more. I don't want to be left in a where I am tired of getting anything and I'm ready for things to end.
Yeah, I mean, hitting that balance perfectly is nearly impossible. But you're right. It does feel better when the game feels like it wraps up naturally rather than outstaying its welcome.
I honestly felt like it was the perfect length. I was not disappointed nor excited for the cloud to have stopped moving at the end. It was the adequate amount of clouds moving out of the way to reveal levels to me.
As far as the difficulty goes, one of the level designers at Yacht Club, his philosophy is, if my grandmother cannot beat this level, it is too hard. Because their goal is to make the game as accessible as possible for everybody, which is both a curse and a blessing in some ways, because like players like us that are used to playing video games, of course, might immediately recognize how to do something and generally won't struggle too much. Whereas people that are less experienced with games, as I saw at PAX, they will just not understand like either the controls or how the character moves, or like they just haven't played many platformers. I'm not sure, because I do tell, like, people constantly tell me this game is hard, and like this NES hard, and I'm like, no, it's not NES hard. It's as hard as an NES game, but it's not NES hard.
Yeah.
Like
it is as
all the
hard as
jumps-
many NES games, but there were, I mean, DuckTales is a notoriously easy game, and this
There's
game
plenty.
borrows from DuckTales in a lot of ways. So I think it's,
Yeah.
I think it's a fair comparison to say that it is as hard as, you know, one of its forerunners, DuckTales. So
Just to qualify, that designer from Yacht Games Club, his grandmother's actually TGH, so you got to keep that in mind with the statement.
That's
So,
true.
Yeah.
I can definitely see this game being difficult for casual gamers. Like I was saying before, you know, me
there
and
were
John,
parts that were. I mean, I died 100 times. It's not like I died twice,
For
right?
sure.
I mean, that's.
Yeah, I would be very impressed to see his grandmother actually pass through Propeller Knight stage, you know, in a reasonable amount of time. I would be surprised to see anyone's grandmother beat Propeller Knight stage in a reasonable amount of time.
I'm surprised TGH is a grandmother, so didn't see that one coming.
Who would have thought? Yeah, but I mean that makes a lot of sense. It's sometimes hard for us because, you know, exactly like you said, we're always seeking out the next great challenge. That's what we're looking for in a game. But you know, you're sort of playing to two masters when you design a game. You want the casual players to enjoy it, and you want the challenge seekers to be able to enjoy it. So
Yeah, I mean, some people like my niece loves Kirby games, loves Pokemon games, right? Like, she gets a blast out of those. Whereas when something's that easy to me, it gets me kind of frustrated or whatever. So there's so many different types of gamers out there, and that's why it's cool. I think the video game community has realized that at this point, and so there's some games that are built around like you need zero skill to play this game, and now there's like super difficult games that are built around like the Dark Souls series and stuff that's resulted from that, where it's like, no, we want to make this game specifically for those people who want the highest challenge possible and to push themselves. So I think back in the day they didn't really have that. That distinction wasn't as relevant in like the NES era or the SNES era.
Thinking about it in those terms, it's actually interesting because it seems like now that I'm really putting it in those terms, it's probably pretty easy to design a game that's on one end or the other of the spectrum. I mean, you've got on one end Kirby's Epic Yarn, which it's literally impossible to die in that game. You cannot physically fail at it. And then you've got the other side of the coin, like, you know, some brutally difficult games like the I Want to Be the Guy games, like you know, Dark Souls is often considered that, but I don't think Dark Souls is really the best example. But you've got these games that are like an intentionally impossible challenge.
All the ROM hacks that have been getting made for, you know, that have gotten so popular because people are looking for that extreme other end of, I want to play something that it takes me, or Mario Maker is a game like, I want to find a level that takes me 100 hours to beat this one level. I mean, that's the complete extreme of opposites of.
But I think it's got to be
gaming.
easy to develop on one end or the other of the spectrum. The hard part is really designing a game that caters to both. You know, designing a game that is possible for the casual player to beat, but also gives people the proper challenge. And I think that this game probably does, in reality, strike a nice balance. I think I would have liked to have seen the game be as difficult as it was. I really did enjoy some of the challenge, but just maybe longer.
Sure. So with that all said, Chad, what is your number from 0 to 10?
I think in general, if it weren't for the few complaints that I made, I think that this game would be dangerously nearing the 10 territory for me. But I think that I would have really liked it to be maybe about twice as long as it was. And that being said, I have to factor in the fact that there's still DLC out there that I haven't played. So this isn't a money thing. This is like the gameplay. I feel like there was sort of more to explore with the mechanics. I think this is probably for me like a 7.5 or an 8. It's really up there. It's a really, really polished, solid experience, one that I would recommend to literally anybody. If it had been longer than it was, I think that I would probably be definitely at a 9.
Yeah, I'd say an 8. It was a little short. I mean, I felt like a perfect amount for me because I was ready to be done that night. But yeah, if I had bought this casually and just kind of wanted to eke as much time out of it, I would have probably wanted to be a little bit longer, a little bit harder. But honestly, the music is just banging. The gameplay is a lot of fun, and it's a great homage to. I think it's been fun to see indie games develop that are kind of focused towards people like us who love 8-bit, 16-bit platforming, and to adapt that to a modern audience and a modern game style. And you know, it's been a lot of fun to play games like Shantae, Wonder Boy, Celeste, this Azure Striker, Gunvolt. You know, those are really, it's really cool to see that type of genre rising up, and this was just as good as all of those games. So I liked it a lot. Eight's a strong rating for me.
You can definitely see the games that are pandering versus the games that are paying homage to. There's a lot of games out there that are pandering to the 8-bit crowd, and they don't do as good of a job. Like, this is a love story to that 8-bit style of game. So
absolutely. So I say an 8. That's a good rating. That's well above average. So I definitely strong recommend it if you've never played it and you're a platforming fan. I don't know why you wouldn't have played it. Do you say 10, Muncha? You have an answer?
I'll probably actually go with a 9. Like, cause like it is mostly perfect. Like, to me anyway. The only complaints I have really are, like you guys said, the length and kind of the difficulty in some sections. I wish that there were more. Like in Shovel Knight specifically, I wish there were more opportunities for me to like take some really risky pogos off enemies over bottomless pits or something. But I think it just does a very good job at everything that it set out to do, and it strikes a very nice balance of giving the less experienced crowd a sense of like adventure and feeling like a powerful knight, and without being too difficult. But it also has enough mechanics in it to give a lot of emergent gameplay to those that are looking for that extra challenge.
Yeah, so we got a 7.5, we got an 8 and a 9, but I guarantee that this upcoming speedrun section, you're gonna give it a 10 out of 10.
So we're going ahead and talking a little bit about the speed run of this game, and I think that as much as we talked about the length of it feeling a little bit short, I think it actually ends up being the perfect length for a speed run. You know, there's a lot of games out there that I think we've all experienced that. Every single human alive has experienced this idea of playing a video game and then wanting to speedrun it and saying, but the speedrun's going to be 2 hours, or the speedrun's going to be 6 minutes. And like, you never really, it's hard to find games that fit in that real sweet spot. And I think for all of our complaints about length, Shovel Knight ends up landing really nicely in that sweet spot. And so,
absolutely.
And so, really quickly, let's talk a little bit about the categories. So we are going to be talking a little bit about the DLC. It's not something that we talked about at length in the actual coverage of the game, but there's a lot of really interesting DLC that sort of rounds out the whole Shovel Knight community. There's a ton of crossover. They're based on the same engine, so people who are good at one, some of that's probably going to translate over a little bit. So to start off with the Shovel Knight, the original campaign, any percent and New Game Plus and 100% all have world records by the same person. They're all by Smauggy. He has a 42.28 in any percent, a 37.49 in New Game Plus, and a 1 hour, 3 minutes, and 8 seconds in 100%. And for those of you
who is Shovel Knight.
He is basically Shovel Knight. He's got the blue armor, he's got the shovel, strike the earth, He's good to go. For those of you who maybe don't remember, we don't always use this terminology all the time, and some of you are maybe not quite as entrenched in the speedrunning community. New Game Plus is typically the category name that we use to refer to the category where you play off of a file that you've already beaten the game, and so you can basically start from the beginning with all of the power-ups that you got throughout the game. So you don't have to wait until you acquire something, you start the game with it, which allows you to use those items in creative ways in much earlier stages. So that's the long and the short of what New Game Plus is. Plague Knight, the Plague Knight campaign, has an any percent world record in 38:07 by Flatterby, a New Game Plus in 35:15 by Tolu, and a 100% in 1 hour, 9 minutes, and 22 seconds by Tolu. And then Spectre Knight campaign is any percent New Game Plus and 100% all by MunchaKoopas. It's 37:51 for any percent, 33:11 for New Game Plus, and 58:42 for 100%. So they all sort of land in this really nice range, like 30 to 40 minutes for their any percent and New Game Plus categories, and roughly an hour for their 100% categories. And one of the things that I noticed when I saw this leaderboard was I really thought it was very interesting that each campaign sort of broke down different people. So a lot of times you'll see a leaderboard where all of the categories are sort of just owned by one person. Someone's good at one category, it's probably going to translate over, and so some person makes a clean sweep of all the categories. We see that on a lot of leaderboards. I think it's really cool that Shovel Knight breaks down by campaign. So Smauggy is pretty comfortably the Shovel Knight, MunchaKoopas is very comfortably the Spectre Knight, and between Fladervi and Tolu, there's Plague Knight. So I think it's pretty interesting the way that that breaks down. So, Muncha, you mentioned that there's sort of an interesting origin of the New Game Plus category. So there's something that sort of makes its existence a little bit interesting.
Yeah, well, for New Game Plus, there's a lot of rules involving the in-game enemies that spawn on the map. They're actually all hard-coded to interact with a certain time frame. At least now they are. But in the early days of Shovel Knight, you would get to a certain point after about beating 6 levels, and then a bunch of enemies would spawn on the map right in the area of Flying Machine, Stranded Ship, and the Clockwork Tower. And this posed a lot of problems for runners because they would just move around randomly, they would block you on the map and waste a ton of time. And then Yacht Club actually put in a patch to the game which changed the way those enemies behaved to where they would not spawn on the map unless you had beaten one of the earlier enemies on the map or over an hour of in-game time had passed. So if you were a speedrunner, you could get to this point in the game, those enemies would not spawn and they would not bother you. However, this poses a problem for New Game Plus because a continuing file runs off of that same timer in-game. And so there was no way in New Game Plus to do a legitimate playthrough and avoid those map enemies. And at the time, in those early days of Shovel Knight speedrunning, there was really only like one person that was interested in running New Game Plus, and that's the Taiwan Ninja. He actually is tied with Smauggy. They're tied down to the millisecond, and they actually have a current bounty out for anybody that can beat their tied time.
You're talking about for Shovel Knight campaign?
Yeah, for Shovel Knight. At least they should have been tied. They were tied at one point.
Yeah, you're right. They are. I didn't even notice that they had the same time on the leaderboard. So yeah, I'd like to revise that. For New Game Plus, Shovel Knight is both Smauggy and the Taiwan Ninja.
Yeah, Taiwan's like me. He's one of the earliest runners of the game, and he always jumps on New Game Plus as early as he can. So he's like, if you look at the Plague Knight and the Spectre Knight leaderboards, he's also up there. And for a while, he was the guy to beat. And he'll probably be back for King Knight and play it for a little bit and optimize it, and then get bored because no one can beat him, and then go back to playing fighting games. But he's a very
not
nice
a problem
person.
I've ever dealt with, but sounds nice.
No, no, he's a very nice person. But so for New Game Plus, what we ended up allowing is that there is a cheat code which gives you everything in the game that you would need, all the relics, all the armors and whatnot, and it gives you 9 health total instead of 10. And that's important for a very specific reason later in the run. But so what you would do is you would make a file with this code, which gives you a completed regular mode file. You go into that file and you get a couple of the trowel ichors, which will fully restore your health and magic. And then you go back to the title screen, and then you use the file from there to start your run. So this, however, because of this cheat code, it gets rid of all the in-game encounters, And so that's why we use it for New Game Plus, is because then New Game Plus runs can all be comparable. And it never really caused an issue because some people, like, there's a similar code for regular difficulty Shovel Knight where it gets rid of all the map encounters, but it was quickly ruled out by the community before even I entered, that code would not be used, even though it would have solved all of our problems. Like, it was something involving SDA, and like people didn't want to use a cheat code. I don't understand. But the point is that code is used for New Game Plus, and then that actually posed a problem later on for Plague Knight because it actually skips a normally required fight in Plague Knight's story. So we kind of revised the leaderboards a little bit for New Game Plus specifically to where now you can pick, I am using the code that gets rid of the map encounters, or I am not. That said, the no map encounters is generally more popular because, well, you can imagine why. Who wants to waste a bunch of time to map enemies?
Right.
And why 9 hearts instead of 10?
The 9 hearts, the code just happens to like be bugged and not give you the final health bubble. And that's actually important for the dream sequences in the game where if you die as quickly as possible, as soon as you die in those sequences, Shield Knight will immediately fall from the top of the screen. And because you have 1 less health, you can die 1 hit sooner in each of the dreams. And there's no hard rule that New Game Plus has to have everything. You just need to have whatever you need for a New Game Plus run. The Spectre New Game Plus run actually does not get every item. In fact, they leave 1 item unupgraded because it leads to a faster strategy in 1 level. Plague New Game Plus, on the other hand, gets everything because it needs it.
That's interesting. You don't often think about, when you think New Game Plus, you just think, okay, well, you're going to start the game with everything fully upgraded because that's better. But you don't really think about the fact that that's not what the rules are. The rules are just you get to play from a completed file, so you get to make the choice. Like, theoretically, if your community wasn't using that cheat code to construct files, you could construct a file where you never got any health upgrades, and you could potentially be even faster if there was no other reason to need the damage boost.
Correct.
Yeah, like that's funny. Parasite Eve has a New Game Plus where I know Crazy Awesome was saying each time he played through it, it made the next New Game Plus time better because, like, I guess you level up, you never fully level up doing the normal playthrough, so you'd have to spend so much time or something of that sort. So he was like, it helps each time he does New Game Plus because it's a newer game. It's a newer game pluser. So it's funny. But yeah, you don't need everything. That's cool.
Yeah, Shovel Knight specifically gets all the extra health because of the armor choice, which makes you take extra damage, and on top of enemies normally dealing extra damage in New Game Plus. So it ends up being like an enemy that normally hits you for 1 will now hit you for 2 to 4. Okay. And so like there's an attack in New Game Plus Shovel Knight because of the armor we wear that deals like 5 to 6 full hearts.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it becomes a riskier run in a lot of ways, I guess, too.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. You'd think having so much more health that it would actually be an easier run. Like, a lot of times 100% categories in games tend to be easier runs because you're not skipping things just for the sake of time. You're getting all of these extra health upgrades or armor upgrades or whatever. But New Game Plus in this case is actually harder because even though you have 9 hearts, you take more damage and you get dealt more damage by default anyway.
And it gives you that opportunity to do something that, like, it might take time to get that extra armor that's not worth routing into a normal run, but since you can have it, now it provides an opportunity where it's like, well, but we're going to take more damage because we have this item, because that item has a trade-off, right? And now you've, like, created a whole new situation. That's really cool.
That's actually an interesting thing, too, because that armor, I remember the one you're talking about, it's like the spellcaster's armor, and so it makes your magic more effective at the cost of taking more damage, right? That's the one I'm thinking of?
Correct. The Conjurer's Coat.
Yeah, so you actually become stronger, and it makes it faster because you can take more damage in the cases where you need to. So,
yes,
but you wouldn't route that into an any percent run, because do you?
Well, the Conjurer's Coat is also used in any percent.
Okay.
Mostly for the reason of it gives you 50 more base magic. So we never have to. So instead of buying several magic upgrades in the village, we only buy the 1 armor.
I thought that'd be really interesting if it was only used in New Game Plus, because you could have it, because it's kind of changed a lot of the mechanics. But that's still really cool. There's a lot of different stuff that you can get in this game. It's interesting that you have a very specific set of the items that.
So it feels like even like beyond just casually. So casually had you could break checkpoints to either risk versus reward. Feels like the speedrun has that too. The Conjurer's Coat is basically I'm taking an upgrade to my attack at the cost of being more likely to die. So it's like the whole game is just based around this risk versus reward mechanic.
Yeah, It's like the game mostly, as you've seen, takes inspiration from mostly Mega Man and Zelda 2 in a lot of the design aspects. And so like every stage being themed, you like the whole game is level based. Like you'll never go from the flying machine to the stranded ship because they are completely separate entities in the
Right.
game. But like yeah, it's all based on risk versus reward. Like you said, there's like every jump you can possibly make in the game has been looked at from many different perspectives. Like, what if I jump here? What if I jump here? Where will I land? What happens if I use this item at this time? Like, all of those things are taken into consideration when they create a level, so that the level design is consistent and fair and never feels like the game cheated you out of a jump you should have made.
Right. So, is there anything in the game that you actually have to collect in terms of like these power-ups that you can find along the way? I noticed there's a low percent category on the leaderboard, which low percent typically refers to collecting the minimum number of things necessary. So you would get like no health upgrades, you probably never change your armor, and you never you try to pick up as few as possible of these sub-weapons. Are there any of the sub-weapons that are actually required?
No, the entire game for each character is beatable entirely with their basic toolkit. That is a chosen decision by the design team because they couldn't require any of the items for anything because what if a player did not find them?
Right.
So the whole game can be beatable with just your shovel or just your bombs or just your scythe.
That's really
Low
interesting.
percent is actually, that was how I got my start in this game. I tried with any percent, but I was very bad at the game. So I decided, okay, I'll learn low percent, which does not break any checkpoints, and I can only focus on the fundamentals of jumping and my shovel. And currently, I have the record in that category kind of by default. Smoggy does have a faster time, but he picked up a music sheet, so it doesn't really matter in the long run. But like low percent is very near and dear to me because it's like it's the category that I kind of pioneered for this game, and due to my work in that, due to my work in low percent, we actually cut out several item purchases and rerouted like the middle part of any percent. And then due to other boss fights, I found like fighting Propeller Knight without any upgrades, but like other than your shovel. How do you do that fast? So I had to find ways to do that, and then we incorporated more and more of those into any percent.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting perspective for routing too, because once you've identified that you can beat the game without any upgrades, it really calls into question like which of them are actually worth it.
Mm-hmm. Like
So
for a while, well, like the any percent route for Shovel's gone through a lot of changes to where, like Captain Drake's route got a lot of various items. Later on, we cut out 2 of those items and replaced one of the projectiles with a different one. And then it was believed for a while the fastest route was to only get 3 of the items. And now we've come full circle again to where we found a different projectile, the alchemy coin, which is the fastest route in the game to acquire that one because you can hit that coin up with your shovel and then bounce off of it and do a ton of interesting movement tech with it. I have yet to learn any of the strats myself, but they're pretty insane.
Oh
And
wow, I thought the alchemy
yeah.
coin was pretty useless when I bought it. I didn't really understand the value of it, but that's pretty cool that it actually gets some use in the speedrun because it seems like my understanding is that I mean, what's the supposed benefit of the alchemy coin for casual?
For casual play, it should kill most enemies in about 1 hit. It'll kill anything that has 2 health or less in 1 hit, and the more enemies it kills, the more gold it generates. You can technically, like against the mini boss in Explodatorium, you can throw the coin out, it'll hit the boss, bounce back to you, and then you hit it back at the boss. So in certain situations, it's actually like the most damage per magic use of the projectiles. But it mostly comes down to the extra movement tech you can do with it. It really is what makes it save a lot of time.
That's really, really cool. So you mentioned that there's sort of an interesting relationship between low percent. So that's mostly what that is the way it sort of has helped improve the route over time.
Yeah, it's basically like low percent at this point teaches you the fundamentals of how to get good at Shovel Knight. Like using your relics will help you, yes, but more often than not when you're just starting out, you're not going to be aware of when to use your relic. So a lot of times when people say like, "Oh, I want to get into speedrunning Shovel Knight, specifically the character Shovel Knight," we'll recommend like, don't do a full run of low percent, but go look at some strategies, try and pick those up. Because that's basically what it comes down to is can you jump and can you use your shovel? Like you don't have propeller dagger from the start of the game. unless you're
Yeah.
doing New Game
Yeah,
Plus.
I feel
But
like if you're depending on Propeller Dagger or Dust Knuckle to get you out of trouble, then you're probably missing out on some learning experiences.
exactly. So like it really came, like for me personally, it just came down to like a personal obsession with how much can I do without anything else.
Okay. So, just in terms of tech, so just breaking down the game a little bit, what's some interesting tech in the Shovel Knight, the original campaign?
So an unoriginal, or sorry, in the original campaign, a mechanic that I don't believe was intended is that, and this is used everywhere in the run if you look closely. When you're on the ground and you swing your shovel, if you push jump, it cancels the attack state, and so you can actually cut your animation of your attack short and continually, like you can then jump again and hit in the air, or you can jump and then chain stun an enemy, like the very first boss, Black Knight. We jump, hit him, jump again to cancel the recovery on the ground, and then just continue chaining that motion over and over. And that's what leads to a lot of keeping Shovel Knight moving, like as a character, is knowing how to cancel your attacks and when to do so. That combined with the fact that when you damage an enemy in this game, it can't damage you back. Like it loses all of its combat boxes at that point. So like there's a section in Lost City where we jump over lava straight into a flying enemy and we just hit it in the face and move right through it. And that is also used with the bosses. So it's like everything just kind of unintentionally, I think, rolled together to make for a very fast combat system. Because I initially suggested that Spectre Knight should operate in a similar way, and they didn't want that to happen. So I have no idea if the jump canceling thing was ever intentional. I've never asked actually. Um, at this point, it doesn't matter. It's in the game, so
Yeah, it is what it is at this point.
yeah.
There's also some interesting skips. So I think one of the things that makes this game kind of a cool speedrun to watch, some people do like really glitchy speedruns and some people don't, but I think by and large, Shovel Knight is not very glitchy. It's a
Yeah.
very straightforward run in terms of the tech that's used. It's just learning how to make the best use of the tools that you have available rather than just trying to figure out exploits in the game. There's obviously these little bits of movement tech and combat tech that can help speed things up, but there is one notable one in the first stage, at least, that you pointed out to me, and maybe there's others. What are the some of the interesting skips that are in this?
So the one you mentioned in the first stage happens just before the end of the level. For anyone familiar with Shovel Knight, you'll come to a screen with a bubble dragon, and if you wait for the bubbles to get into a certain spot, you can actually bounce on them and skip 2 rooms because you bounce off of the bubble and jump so high that you're in a screen transition 2 rooms above where you start bouncing. And that just kind of zips you through the camera bounds and places you just outside the collision of one of the rooms right before the end of the level. It doesn't save much time, but it's worth it to go for in a run. And it's one of the only spots in the whole game where something like that can happen just because of the way the rooms are laid out. Um, like there are other spaces in the game, like especially in Plague Knight's campaign, where you can do these sort of screen wraps and skip a couple rooms. But it, like Shovel Knight as a whole, is very, it's mostly glitchless, and that's what attracts a lot of people to it. Is that it's to speedrun Shovel Knight, you just have to be good at Shovel Knight for the most part. Um, One interesting trick that happens in Pridemore Keep, the second level, is that if this works anywhere in the game on any screen transition, but during the startup of your jump, if you hit a screen transition and input your attack at the same time you hit the transition, Shovel Knight will actually extend his jump by about a tile if you do it correctly.
Oh
And
wow.
it's usable in one spot in the run to jump onto a platform that you otherwise have to do a little puzzle for. It's the only spot in the entire run where that is used just because it happens to line up that way.
Yeah, I imagine it goes fairly unnoticed too. That sounds like the sort of thing that you kind of need to explain to people for them to see what's going on.
Yeah, because it if you've played Shovel Knight, you'll look at it and be like, "Wait, you can't jump that high, nor did you do."
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And you said that the transition between Shovel Knight and Plague Knight's pretty straightforward, right? It's pretty much the same bosses and they have the same patterns, right?
yeah, Plague Knight was made at a time in yacht clubs like Formation, or years where the team was still basically the same size from when they had first made Shovel Knight, and they weren't really sure. This was the first of their boss DLCs they had made, so they weren't really sure what they wanted to do. So they remixed a couple of rooms and a couple of the stages, but for the most part, they have exactly the same layout that they have in the Shovel of Hope campaign. And it's mostly just about, here's the same levels, but with a really interesting like movement set. And it Plague Knight was all about freeform movement and flying through rooms if you knew how to chain his jumps and everything together. and that's what his campaign boils down to in the speedrun. Whereas Spectre and King Knight are built from the ground up using all new levels, like they really utilize the mechanics. Some people don't like that Plague of Shadows doesn't have as many unique mechanics to it, or like unique rooms, and I would kind of agree. But at the same time, there's something fun about like kind of like in Super Mario World, like, oh, okay, I went through that whole level and it was really difficult. Now I kind of want to just fly over it and feel really cool because that I want to feel cool. And
Sure.
Plague Knight really allows for that in certain situations.
Are there ever situations where it feels like the level was really built for Shovel Knight's mechanics, and so for Plague Knight there it removes the challenge, or maybe makes the challenge different in some way?
I think like in the Shovel of Hope campaign, there's a lot of open areas, like there's no ceiling, so it's very easy with Plague Knight to in certain rooms just fly over the top of everything. And Plague Knight also gets flung back about twice as far when he takes damage, so a lot of the strategies come down to flinging yourself at an enemy, turning the other way, and damage boosting the way you want. It's a lot of fun, but it can be a little unruly, especially for an inexperienced platformer player.
Why do you think that there's... I mean, so the way you're making it sounds like the game's relatively similar. Why do you think it is that, you know, for instance, Smaugy is very clearly quite good at Shovel Knight? Why is he not topping the leaderboards in Plague Knight, for instance?
The reasons being are some people like to play every character because they want to try every character, at least to some extent. Smoggy himself has said that he just enjoys Shovel Knight's gameplay. He's played Plague Knight, he's played through Spectre of Torment, but they didn't, for whatever reason, they didn't interest him from a speedrun perspective. I really liked Plague when he first came out, and I still do enjoy playing the character. There's just certain things in his run that make me not want to do the run, but that's like my own personal thing with it.
Sure.
So it really just comes down to what do you like to do in your platformer games.
Do they have different stories and stuff as well, or is it just kind of set you up
Yeah.
wherever? Or...
So Plague Knight is both a side story and an alternate dimension in terms of the relation to the story. Spectre Knight is a prequel to the Shovel of Hope campaign, and then King's story is actually a prequel to the prequel.
A prequel.
Yes.
Cool.
That's the name for it. Yeah, so Plague Knight's like the story of how the Enchantress got the Order of Hope, or sorry, the Order of No Quarter to join up, right? Like he owed her a debt, and in order for him to pay the debt, he had to like enlist all of these people.
Well, that was Spectre of Torment.
Sorry, that's Spectre Knight. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm getting the stories backwards.
No, it happens.
Yeah.
But Plague Knight is his story is kind of like Shovel Knight's. It's guy gets the girl after overcoming many obstacles and learning valuable lessons about life. So that's essentially Plague's journey.
Has that story ever been told before, or?
I have no idea.
Yeah,
probably.
It's got to be the first time we've ever heard a story about a man loving a woman.
And overcoming obstacles.
So brave, honestly.
That's the twist.
How
That's
brave
the twist,
is it?
honestly.
How brave is it to tell that story?
Very.
Yeah. So Spectre Knight, after I made the huge gaffe of getting their stories confused, Spectre Knight has a lot of different gameplay too. Is there so what's like the notable things about Spectre Knight? I think one of the things that makes it look really cool is this mechanic of sort of being able to slash through something as a platforming mechanic. So if you like come up across a lamppost or an enemy or some hanging chandelier or something, you can actually slash through it to give you what is essentially an extra jump. So what does that run end up looking like? Is it more broken than Shovel Knight, or is it still tend to be a relatively glitchless campaign?
It's a relatively glitchless campaign. There's one wall clip you can do in the Lost City, but other than that, it's just to speedrun Shovel or Spectre Knight, you just have to be good at Spectre Knight. As for Spectre's unique mechanics, he can of course climb on walls and do wall jumps. And the one that really gets a lot of people interested is the armor choice for the speedrun, the Rail Mail, which what that does is when you hold down after jumping and landing on a surface, you'll begin skating on that on that surface in that direction, and you don't have to do any other input. If you hold, like if you want to go to the right and you hold down right, you'll skate faster, and it does build momentum, and that changes into your jumps and everything. So it does allow you to make like more risky plays than you would if you didn't have that armor.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Spectre is all about looking flashy and being cool. I personally found a lot of his level design to be like too straightforward and too linear, because what I really liked about Shovel Knight and Plague Knight is that you can kind of craft your own way to defeat that enemy or move through a room by like, oh, there's a dirt clod here. If I jump up and hit it with my shovel, I can then pogo off of it and grab this ladder. Or like if I'm Plague Knight, I can, chain my bursts through this screen transition and get a lot of extra height and skip this portion. Whereas Spectre is very rigid and like segmented into, now you're climbing up this wall, then you're jumping over here. And to me, it took out a lot of the fun of what I liked about Shovel Knight. But, it's obvious a lot of people like Spectre Knight, and he is still fun to play. It's fun to skate around as him. It's cool to make these death-defying jumps and just feel like you are the Reaper personified.
Yeah, that's an interesting trade-off. We talk a lot of times about how cool a mechanic might be, but if the level design doesn't complement it in the right way, sometimes that can be really tough to negotiate. You say, well, it's got this really cool mechanic where you can slash through things and get an extra jump, and like you said, that armor upgrade allows you to basically go faster than was intended, which should translate into some pretty cool strats. But if the level design doesn't permit for at least a little bit of creativity, you sort of walk into a room and it's already solved.
Yeah, there definitely is creativity to be had, because like I stopped running Spectre, and obviously my best time is a 44-minute run for any percent, and we have times as low as 37s. So there's a lot of things there that I obviously did not catch on to, and there's a lot of optimization to be had. So there are still things where you can express yourself and do cooler strats that, kind of break the level design in that way. It's just, for me personally, I don't enjoy controlling Spectre Knight. That's simply what it boils down to.
That makes perfect sense. So if people were wanting to get into speedrunning Shovel Knight, any of its campaigns, really, where would they go?
I would recommend going to the speedrun.com page. We should have a link to our Discord server, the Spade Brigade, there. If not, I would recommend just checking Twitch regularly, especially right now since we have a low percent tournament going on. People have been practicing a lot. But pretty much the best way is just to find a Shovel Knight runner and say, hey, can you get me involved? And we'll happily send you a link. We'll do whatever we can to accommodate you. We'll link you tutorials, whatever you need to get started running this game.
Is there a pretty big active community? I look at your leaderboard, and for a relatively recent game, having a leaderboard with 160 something people in your main category is actually pretty good. That's a pretty sizable leaderboard.
Yeah, it comes and goes with like whatever tournament might be happening, or whatever, like people might suddenly decide, oh, I want to go play Plague, and they'll get a bunch of new optimizations for that. Right now, that's what's happening with Shovel. So people tend to jump around, or people like Smoggy, he only ran Shovel, so he doesn't want to come back unless he feels like exploring King Knight. Every GDQ, we kind of get a little bump, but it's a fairly active community. Like, even though there might not be a lot of runners active at one time, everyone that has run the game is generally active in the Discord server and enthusiastic, like, when it comes to talking about the game.
That's really awesome.
Yeah.
Are there any recommendations you'd give? Maybe how to start learning? So, like, what categories to start with, or would you recommend this game to a new speedrunner? You were a new speedrunner when you picked it up.
I would definitely recommend this game to a new speedrunner, because it strikes that good balance between like having enough fun glitches and cool tech to where you feel cool for executing it, but it's also like you don't have to worry about like manipulating RNG or a Pokemon spawn or something. So it's a very manageable speedrun from that perspective, regardless of what character you choose. I would say the best thing to do if you're interested is like just find some rooms you think from a speedrun for whatever character you want that you think look cool, and try to learn them. And if it seems manageable, if it seems like something you'd like to continue doing, then just continue fiddling with it. That's what I did. Like, it eventually for me just evolved into an obsession with, I want to be like one of the best at this game, specifically for this category of shovel only. But like any speedrun, just try it. Like any hobby you want to get into, just start doing it.
Yeah,
cool.
Absolutely.
Well, let's take a quick break, and we will come back with just a few questions.
So as always, we like to answer your Q&A. That's one advantage of being here live on Twitch. And we have somebody here named John Carls. That's me. And I want to know, who is everybody's favorite knight?
I want to know who's everyone's favorite knight too.
Yeah,
Can I ask that question?
Start. You can answer that question.
Oh. That's
what about
tough.
you, Muncha? Do you have one?
Munch is definitely...
Okay. You all think I'll answer with mine, which is already clear. Tinker Knight is my favorite knight. I'm a big fan of any, like, boss or thing that has, like, an interesting mask on, especially one that's, like, used for a normal life thing and then, like, is transformed into, like, a horror thing or something. Like, I love Jason Voorhees's hockey mask. I've always been a Jason fan, and so he reminded me of Jason Voorhees a little bit, and I don't know, he was cute. He had, like, this nice little bench he was tinkering at. I liked him. I want the Tinker Knight DLC.
Yeah, I was ahead of you in the race at that point in the race, and I remembered hearing you fighting the little Tinker Knight and saying, "This is too easy. Why is this so easy? Why am I beating this?" And then
I was confused. I was confused as to why he was
and
not seeming to put up a good fight.
And I was waiting for the base to drop.
Yeah. Well,
as it were.
I still didn't die. I didn't die in that fight.
No,
so.
you didn't. It was
so the
really
base dropped on him. Thank you very much. Now stop stalling and answer the question.
It's tough. There were a lot of bosses that I thought were really challenging and interesting. I think the one that I ended up liking the most was Treasure Knight. I thought that the fight was kind of varied, and the stuff that I pulled off in that fight felt really rewarding. Like, once I started to read his patterns, I felt really proud of myself. But just like in terms of who the fight is, it wasn't particularly interesting on its own. He was just a guy with a hook shot. But that was a cool fight nonetheless. Like, you know, he stuck to the ceiling, they'd stick to the floor, they'd fly all around the room.
He's no Tinker Knight.
I want to say, yeah, but you took Tinker Knight, so I can't pick that one. I want to say Spectre Knight or Plague Knight. Spectre Knight was definitely the one that felt more like a classic NES game. Like, I felt like I was fighting Death from Castlevania 1.
Absolutely, I would agree with that for sure. It did feel like an NES game. The patterns just felt like I don't know how to articulate that. The patterns were very NES like, but they were like, it just felt like the kind of patterns I had to learn to beat Castlevania or Mega Man game of the past.
You didn't have a lot of games in that era where the bosses were doing a lot of really, really unique things. And for Spectre Knight isn't doing a lot of unique stuff. He is flying to different spots on the screen, throwing his scythe in different directions, and spawning a few enemies. And that's pretty much Spectre Knight for you. Like that.
And that's pretty much most NES bosses for you. So it felt nostalgic and nice.
Yeah, but it was in a nice way. I liked it.
Yeah.
It was more of that 8-bit homage.
What about you? Do you have one?
I would probably say I identify most with probably Polar or Spectre. I also really like Propeller just because I like his carefree attitude, and also being a rich person owning a flying machine and inviting people up for parties. Just that sounds like fun.
That sounds like a good life.
Yeah,
I personally do not own a flying machine, or I'm hoping to get invited to a party someday. But both of those sound really cool.
Party on a flying machine. Maybe that'll happen. Two birds, one stone.
I'm looking at the video right now, and screw all of the knights. The anglerfish with the treasure chest as his bait. That was the best.
It doesn't answer the question.
It doesn't matter. That's the best.
Oh my gosh.
That's the best one.
Well, I guess we have one more question from Dr. No here in chat. Better speedrun in your opinion, base game or Spectre DLC? You were saying kind of casually, like you didn't find Spectre DLC as interesting, right? But as a speedrun, do you find one to be a better speed game?
I personally still think Shovel of Hope is the best speedrun of the three, just because of all the things that are not apparent just by looking at it. Like, there's a lot of subtle movement tricks, there's a lot of little things that you have to understand how to do in order to make that character go fast. Not to say that there aren't for the other characters, but their movement makes it a bit more straightforward, especially for, like, Plague, and in some instances Spectre, just because of how, like, Spectre's in particular, how his level design works. But personally, I like Shovel, but they are all amazing speedruns to watch. I watch them at any chance I can.
For sure.
I realized I forgot to mention something during the discussion, but one thing that I thought that was really interesting about this game is the body swap mode it has when you're creating your file. It's kind of an interesting You know, we don't really talk. We talk about Nintendo games a lot here, so we don't really get to talk about issues of being relatively progressive. But the body swap mode is kind of interesting because not just allowing you to sort of play as a guy or a girl, but in addition to that, it sort of takes it several steps further than that, and lets you craft your own experience. So you can play as a male or a female sprite. You can make Shield Knight a male or a female sprite, and in both cases you can make them use male or female pronouns, and that is not corresponding to the body sprites as well. So it's
I didn't even notice that that was an option. That's really cool.
Yeah, it gives you a lot of opportunities to sort of craft your full experience, which I thought was kind of neat.
Yeah, we've seen that more with some of these reimagined kind of modern retro inspired games. Like you can do that in Dragon's Trap as well. You can at least pick male or female, and it's nice that they're providing some more options that aren't here's a white space marine, you can play as that or nothing else. So it's good to see gaming get a little more progressive, and yeah, that's really cool. I didn't know you could change Shield Knight as well, which is neat.
You can change all of the bosses, all of their genders for their sprites, as well as all of their pronouns, provided your language is set to English.
Wow, that's really cool.
I didn't realize it worked for the bosses as well. I think I missed that. So
yeah.
Yes, gender swap or body swap, excuse me. Mole Knight is probably my favorite sprite in all of Shovel Knight, because she just has this flaming red hair and looks like the typical opera singer that you'd see that comes out and breaks all the glass in the place.
Clearly, you need a different speedrun category for every different combination that's possible, in my opinion. That's the only thing.
How about no? Because that would take too much time. However, I do have to test all of those combinations. That's fun.
There you go.
Oh wow,
that could end up being a lot of tests.
That does sound like a lot of tests.
Fun Easter egg I want to mention real quick is if you set your language to Japanese, one of the 2 Japanese settings, there will actually be sprite differences inside the game itself in Shovel Knight's campaign and in Plague Knight's campaign. Certain enemies will have a different color palette, and some background things will have a new animation or an animation in the first place. Like the grass in Plains of Passage will sway back and forth.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow. Why did they specifically
put
that for
That's
Japanese?
It was due to a lot of NES games, when they're localized for one region or the other, they would change colors to make more sense in that area. So, like in the Flying Machine, the Wisms, the mages in that level, will go from being whatever color they are in English to being like a bright fluorescent green or something. So
it's because America hates grass that's blowing back and forth. We hate it.
That too.
We won't stand for it.
So a Zulag in chat just asked, what's the best category of any campaign?
Low percent, of course.
Okay.
Of course.
Big low percent fan. I mean, you pioneered the category, so I feel like you might be a little bit biased. It's like saying, my son's not really the best.
My favorite podcast is the Frame Savers. What are you talking about? So I get it. I get it.
My favorite
Don't
podcast
listen to
is
them.
not the Frame Savers.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a real good note for us to leave on, by the way. Thanks for listening to the Frame Savers.
So if you do want to ask us a question in the future, maybe based on a specific game that we've announced ahead of time, or perhaps, just a general question for us about, the podcast or our own streams, anything off the cuff that you feel like you'd like read on the podcast, go ahead and you can hit us up. Go to theframesavers.com, and it has links to everything. Our Discord has a specific channel just for questions, and we post ahead of time what the next episode is going to be. So if you see a game that maybe piques your interest or you have a question about, go ahead and hop in there and ask. You can also tweet at us at Twitter, at the twitter.com/theframesavers.
We've actually gotten a few by email as well. If you've got a long form question, you need a paragraph to set it up, or you want to praise us heavily for all of our hard work on the pod. I mean, really just anything. Feel free to email us at theframesavers@gmail.com.
Yeah, so you can hit us up in all those places. You can also find us at the Framesavers. That has links to all of our different content, including our Patreon, which is where we get our support to be able to make this podcast go. We have 4 $25 a month patrons we want to give a huge shout out to. If you want your name read out on this shout out list, then go ahead and check out that Patreon. But we got Tina Hacks, Mr. Pizak, Kip, and Drex. That's DDRREEXX, and Kip with 2 P's. But they all 4 stream. Go follow them on Twitch. They're all great friends of ours and supporters of the Framesavers, which makes them better streamers than other people, in my opinion. So huge
it makes
thanks
us the
to
best
them for
sort
that.
of humans.
Yeah, so big thanks to that. So go ahead, if you're looking for any of our stuff, for the Patreon, for the Twitter, Discord, links to our older episodes. All of that is on theframesavers.com. Muncha, where can they find you if they want to watch you doing some low percent Shovel Knight action?
You can find me at twitch.tv/MunchaKoopas. I stream when I can, as my work schedule has me very busy, but I try to entertain people when I feel like it.
Nice. And there's a tournament going on right now, so, I mean, you can probably catch some of that going on.
I'm certain that's probably on all the speed gaming channels. I think you all know about those by now.
It's on all of them at once.
If you don't follow all the speed gaming channels, you're going to miss a lot of tournaments. So go follow those. Chad, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube at AuthorBlues. Where can they find you?
You can find me at johncarls-fortnite.
Nope.
At gmail.com. No, you can find me at John Carls on Twitter and Twitch. You can find me at John Carls1 on YouTube. We also want to give a shout out to our friends at the Warp World podcast. They are a fellow podcast that does similar stuff to us and friends of ours. You can find them at podcast.warp.world. Lots of Twitch and streaming news there. So a kind of completely different perspective of the hobby, but definitely worth a follow. Also, big shout out to Brian Morgenthaler, our producer, for making this sound as good as it does. You can find him on Twitter and Twitch at bmorgstv. And thank you to me and you for organizing the Q&A.
Yeah, it was really hard.
So last thoughts, go get this game and play it if you haven't. Most of you aren't as lame as us, but there's probably somebody out there as lame as us that hasn't played it. So
but even if you have played it, pretty soon it's going to be King of Cards coming out. It's going to be Shovel Knight Showdown. You probably haven't finished Spectre Knight. I know you haven't done it.
Yeah.
Plague Knight, you enjoyed it, but you should play it again. Why not?
You can put that stuff on your resume too.
There's so much content.
100% Spectre Knight, put it on your resume. That's what I say.
Put it on my resume.
Yeah, there you go. It probably helps you more than others. But thank you so much for everybody listening, for hanging out here in the Twitch channel, and we are looking forward to seeing you next episode.
Peace.